Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, returning guest. We spoke last month. His name is David Gosselin, Gosselin. We spoke last month about his book, A Renaissance or New Middle Ages. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It has a lot of fantastic research, a lot of stuff that I'm interested in. And when I was talking to him about that book, I noticed, or he imparted to me, they'd also done a documentary. So if you're watching this on X, Rumble, or Rockfin, you will see kind of a screenshot of the intro to the documentary titled The Devil at Woodstock. And it's also a lot of stuff I'm interested into as well. And you can see it at his Substack. So I'll put a link in the Substack in the show notes. And his Substack is Age of Muses, all one word. So AGEOFMUSES.substack.com. You can see a link to that. A lot of great research in there. Somebody I know, I actually talked to Michael Parker last week or 2 weeks ago about Manchurian Candidate. He's in the documentary, as well as the great Dave McGowan. Actually, the documentary is kind of dedicated to the memory of Dave McGowan, who, just an interesting fact, I went to the first reading at Book Soup on Sunset in LA of the Weird Scenes book. So I have a signed copy signed to me from Dave McGowan. I met him and his brother and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to kind of see his work still bouncing around and still being remembered, especially on like big shows like Rogan, who refuse to say Dave McGowan's name, but Tim Dillon does. But anyway, I'm glad to have back author and filmmaker David B. Gosselin. So David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, William. Thanks for having me back so soon. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a great talk last time. And I'm glad you came back to talk about this. Maybe for people who didn't catch our earlier episode, you can talk about your background, your writing, your work, where people can find your work, and then what led up to the research and compilation of this documentary, The Devil at Woodstock.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been working on this kind of stuff for a while. The Devil at Woodstock is a culmination of many different fields of interest that I've had over the years, from psychological warfare to the role of art and culture in shaping society, to classical poetry and the Western classical tradition that goes back to the ancient Greeks, right? Aeschylus, Homer, Sophocles, the classical Greek stage, pretty much. And so I take a very broad perspective when we're talking about art, which is what this documentary is technically about, though it's a lot more, is really the role of art in shaping our thought, our emotions, and the images that are proliferated in society. So The Devil at Woodstock specifically is about the emergence of the 1960s counterculture, which was one of the most pivotal moments in modern history in terms of really reimagining Western civilization, if you will. So I've always been interested in, how do people form the identities that they do? What's the difference between just being a regular, I don't want to say normie, but normie where you don't have a historical sense of identity, right? You don't really have a sense of the larger narratives shaping society. As Tim Dillon put it, I'm a Tim Dillon connoisseur. Him and Ray Kump were talking about in one of the recent Patreons. They were saying, like, what is a normie? And a normie is pretty much someone who said, this is how I was told life works. This is how things work. And this is how I've chosen to live my life. And so there isn't too much questioning, right? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with, being a regular person. But I think part of being a regular person is we ask questions, right? We're curious and we want to know why things are the way they are. That's how we're all born, right? Every child says, why? Why this? Why that? Why that? And, then they go through the education system. They're exposed to all sorts of culture and stuff. And they lose the original spirit, that Socratic spirit that is innate in all of us. So I've always been driven by that and understanding, how we got here. where did it all go wrong? Not that it's all wrong, but how has our society been changed, and what are the causes for that? And so that's what led me into the question of culture, history, and the 1960s is really a pivotal moment to really make sense of everything, up until now, and including now the new shift, which is kind of going the polar opposite, away from an age of Aquarius, in some ways back to more the Apollonian age of like militarism and formalism, right? You kind of have a Templar revival, if you will, and the excesses of the new age and stuff are now sort of, it's just a different iteration of the same thing. But yeah, it's important to know how we got here, right? If we're gonna make any kind of difference or make sense of what's going on, we have to know how we got here, and we have to know where we're headed so that we can play it out as if it were a classical Greek drama and see what happens, right? Like, see, like, do we like the future that we're about to play out, and what would be necessary to avoid a tragedy?
Right, that's a great question. A lot of people take it for granted. I would say the normie mindset is they're not curious how we got here. And that incuriosity doesn't take into account this kind of social engineering and the movement or shifting or nudging of societies. And what's interesting too is Crowley predicted the birth of the child of the new aeon, or the aeon of Horus, would be the 60s. It's interesting because so much happened in the super chaotic, or Dionysian, if you want to go the kind of Nietzschean route, the opposites, Apollonian and Dionysian, which plays into your documentary, this whole thing. So the pendulum does swing, right?
Yeah, and my position is that the pendulum will always swing as long as we don't practice discernment, right? Discernment is, you're not buying anything wholesale, right? The solution to radical leftism isn't, radical right-wing policies. The solution to Nazism is not communism, right? And the antidote to communism is not Nazism. And when they don't have their faculties of discernment cultivated, which is part of what culture is about, then yeah, you're condemned to vacillate between these extremes, because you always have to buy everything wholesale, and you can't distinguish what's what. And as Tim Dillon once put it, I'm conservative about certain things and I'm liberal on others. Like, that's totally normal too. Nobody needs to abolish the nuclear family, and we don't need to bust down doors because everybody doesn't have the same lifestyle. Like, neither of those are good.
Right, right. I mean, he has a huge it's huge Patreon, doesn't he? Like, he must put out a lot of content there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a regular listener. I listen to I'm a Rothschild here, if you will. So I get the bonus weekly episode plus the once monthly Rothschild episode. But yeah, I
Nice.
think just listening to somebody like Tim Dillon, when people are wondering, like, well, what is an example of culture that it's a bit more adaptive, that's fun, right? It's just as fun as a lot of the culture that people enjoy today, but there's also discernment. And the funny thing today, I think, is that comedy, even in ancient Greek times, it was just the mirror image of tragedy. Whereas tragedy is playing out the extremes, right? What happens when you have stupid ideas and you're committed to them till the very end? All sorts of bad things happen, right? You're not able to reconsider. You're not able to analyze your axioms. Comedy is similar, right? It's satire is kind of pushing things to the extreme and seeing how ridiculous it is, but oftentimes by pushing people to those extremes, you can get them to laugh at their own folly, right? Because you see that if you keep thinking this way, right, the consequences, if you play it out until the end, are absurd. And so I feel that it's such a powerful tool, especially in modern culture, where whether tragedy or comedy, we get people to play things out until the end, you know, play that bad movie till the end, you know, see how you like it. Don't just stop at the rom-com, you know, it's the first date and everything's going well. You know, but then it turns out that it's actually like a horror story, and you just you
It
weren't paying
really,
attention.
maybe we take it for granted, but the comedians are the truth tellers of our age. Look at Rogan, Dylan, Theo Vaughn. The list goes down of like people telling the truth who are comedians. So like the jester plays this important archetype and role, right? I mean, there's just absolutely shouldn't be questioned.
Absolutely. And I think you kind of need that if you're going to delve into the kind of fields of investigation that we frequent, right? You know, for the Luciferian sort of takeover of a lot of our political, cultural, and social institutions, to, you know, whatever, just the banality that it permeates our society. You got to be able to laugh, and you got to also, I think we have to be able to think like tragedians, which is not that different from thinking like comedians, which is that, you know, we're looking at a tragedy. And so what's really missing, right? Why do most tragedies happen? Most tragedies happen because we're not really willing to zoom out. We're not really willing to take a step back and be like, you know, what is this, you know, where is this all headed? What does this really look like? You know, what are going to be the consequences of these decisions? We're so committed to the idea, and we're so certain, right? We believe in things so hard that the idea that something opposite or different could occur, a completely different outcome, isn't something we're willing to entertain. We're not even willing to entertain it. And the comedians and the tragedians are the ones who force us, right, to entertain those things. And it's actually, you know, it's usually a positive outcome when we do. So that's kind of my conception of art in a nutshell. You know, and this plays into a lot of the mind control research that I've talked about in the book, and that we cover in this documentary, which is, long story short, a lot of hypnosis is pretty much it's visualizations, right? It's inductions. We're emoting with certain images. We have positive or negative affectations, positive or negative feelings towards a certain set of images, and that's implanted in us. And then as long as we don't question that, we're sort of always, anything that's kind of against what we believe is the right thing, we think it's bad, right? And the hypnotists are all about just getting people to play these things out, play out these movies in the way that they want you to, play out the predictive programming in the way that they think the script should be written. And so we see that with a lot of modern entertainment. Netflix, it's all this dystopian crap, which is just meant to blackpill people, if anything, where it's like, hey, if it's going to be the day after tomorrow, or it's going to be a zombie apocalypse, or I'm going to be next in line in the Hunger Games, I may as well look out for number one and find the best scam that I can, you know, the best pump and dump, the best crypto scam or stock scam, so that I can, or drop shipping scam, so that I can get out of this game. And so that's what we're constantly hit with. And the thing that I think is important, you know, take a beat is, well, okay, but let's say that's not what would be an alternative? What would reality look like if we weren't to go over the edge? What if reality would look like if we weren't to play out these bad movies until the end, and there was actually a change in how we thought? You know, we actually rebuilt our physical economy. We actually had a nuclear renaissance. We actually had a space renaissance, back to the kind of optimism we saw in the Kennedy era, where people believed in the future, right? Little children, if you'd ask them what they wanted to be, they wanted to be astronauts, they wanted to be engineers. They wanted to go into STEM. They weren't afraid to make a sacrifice or to put in the effort because they knew there was something waiting for them on the other side if they were willing to do that. But if you take that away from people and it's just a pump and dump, then yeah, obviously you get this kind of self-centric world where everybody's just looking out for number one. And the higher consequence is that nobody's thinking about the future, right? No, there's no vision for society. Everybody's living in the moment. And I mean, that's pretty much what Luciferianism is. There is no real morality. It's go by your feelings, pursue pleasure, and avoid pain at all costs.
Right. So we went from the Dionysian or Apollonian to the Luciferian. Like, that's even more scary. But we slid into it without any self-actualization. It's almost like that was the real hypnosis or mind control, is to kind of get you there without ever saying, whoa, 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 and doing some like self-discovery. I think comedy and maybe even like classical theater or whatever is that path of self-discovery or awareness. Maybe that's the benefit of all good theater, is that you come out going, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to end up like that. I don't want to end up in this tragedy. Or the comedy teaches you something that at the end, like, okay, I came out a different transformed person by my own design, not by somebody else's design, right?
Yeah. And I mean, one of the ways that this really became clear to me it was in reading one of the bad guys, if you will, Richard Bandler. He wrote a book. He's the co-creator of neuro-linguistic programming, along with John Grinder. They were working out of, surprise, surprise, Berkeley, and Gregory Bateson was actually his mentor. Like, he was the one who encouraged him to go into hypnosis. So Richard Bandler wrote this book called transformations, how to make effortless change in your life. And he gave one good example that I'll never forget. And he said, people want to stop drinking. People want to stop doing this. They want to break bad habits. And what is most people's reflexes if you're seeing somebody who's like drinking too much? You're like, hey, stop drinking. Hey, why don't you stop doing drugs? Maybe that'll work. But he gave the point. He's like, well, what if I told you don't think about the color blue? What are you thinking about? You're thinking about the color blue. And so he's just making the point that the mind doesn't work the way we think it does at a certain level. And so it's not by saying, don't be a bad person, stop sinning, don't do this, don't do that, right? The kind of very didactic moralizing, that's not really how you can help most people, or like how most people change. But he made the point, he calls them pattern interrupts. If you get people to play out a visualization and you play it till the end, because most people, like they don't want to play things out till the end. You're not telling them what to do at all. You're saying, see how it feels. Like, okay, you're interested in this thing or you want to do that thing, no problem. But have you played it out until the end, or what would you do in XYZ scenario? And people have to be allowed to play that out and to feel their emotions, right? To feel it in their body. That's what a lot of hypnosis is, in both positive and negative sense, right? You can do that for the good, where you get people to emote. How does that actually make them feel in their body, viscerally? And so that's very powerful. So if you can do that, right, which is what art really does, we don't really have to, we don't want to be banging people over the head, which is, I think, kind of the opposite extreme of the Dionysian, right, which is like absolute total liberation, do as thou wilt, right? You enjoy all the pleasures of the world and like have no shame, versus the Apollonian, which is this kind of strict formalism, right? That's why the age of Pisces, which was the Apollonian age that preceded Aquarius, it was sort of associated with formalism, law, militarism, because you're just banging people over the head. right? You're just telling, don't do this, don't do that. If you steal an apple or, you know, you rape some lady, it's the same punishment. You know, we're going to like cut off your left leg or something. So just to say there's no discernment, right? And that doesn't make good people either. If you're just living in the kind of totalitarian dictatorship where everything is legislated, morality is legislated, you don't get good people. You get scared people, and you get vicious people, and you get crafty people who just have to be more cunning in their, you know, designs and their plots because they know that there's this very strict regime. So what's the alternative? This is what Schiller talks about. This is a lot of what kind of informs our approach to art and culture at Age of Muses. He talks about the importance of things like theater, of art, because it's where you can get people to experience all these different emotions and scenarios and ideas, right? Things that aren't necessarily real, but that you suspend disbelief for a moment, you know, watch a movie or watch a play, see what happens. And then, as you said, you know, by the end, because people have actually sat through the whole thing, because it was interesting, right? They were captivated. By the end, they leave it and they're like, yeah, I don't want to be that person, right? Like, I don't want to play out that bad movie or that tragedy. And there's a volition there, right? It's also it's more dignified because people are making choices. They're being given, they're being invited to make choices and to cultivate their awareness rather than just reward and punishment like some, you know, legalistic Maoist system or something where, you know, we just beat you down if you fall out of line. And we're also not just, you know, giving license. It's not carte blanche to just do as thou wilt, like that. So yeah, I think that's the middle ground, and then that's kind of what we're interested in, and what kind of art and culture today gets us there.
Right. That's where we need to get to. Whether like the classics have been lost or whatever, it's just like these are basic things that I think it's been deliberately taken away through these kind of culture creations or the change in culture or the replacement of this illusory culture. Like that's a theme in your documentary, right? This kind of willful, not willful, but the imposition by will of an illusion on another person, if not an entire populace, right? Would you agree with that? Like something like that
Yeah,
is happening? Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. We had a genuine classical culture replaced with, and you know, that term is elusive, and we could talk about that for a real long time. But let's, you know, if we're pointing to examples, we're pointing to the golden age, the Greek golden age, the classical Greek civilization, as opposed to archaic, right? As opposed to pre-Socrates and the classical tragedians. We're talking about the Renaissance. We're talking about the American Revolution as well. You know, the American farmers famously were called the Latin farmer because despite being farmers, which was supposedly a lowly station, they were actually well versed in Latin. You know, they loved
Interesting.
literature. People attended you know, the town halls and the you know, there were committees of
They were civically
correspondence.
minded. Yeah, that de Tocqueville's famous book, which is also kind of forgotten, but he said he was astonished going through the United States at how well informed and well educated people were.
Yeah, no, and so that's like, where do you get that from though? A lot of that comes from culture. Like, sure, some of it comes from uh like there are other ways that people are at, whether it's like pure academia or pure intellect, or you know, you're a contemplative in a monastery, or you're an academic, or you're a scientist, or you're this. But for most people, for most of us, the way that we cultivate our faculties is through culture. And this is what Plato was big on. This is why my documentary ends with reflections on Plato's Republic, which I think is crucial, because he's making the point that a lot of what people think comes from what they feel. We get our cues for how we think about things, what we think about things based on how we feel about them. You know, you see guys, that politician's face, you don't like him, he's a piece of shit. You know, that person talked about some issue that you're very adamant, you feel very strongly about. Well, they're a bad person if they're on the other side of that issue, right? Or an idea. You know, if you're a radical right winger and you run into some, you know, random liberal lady, well, she's on the side of Satan. You know, she's a Luciferian. And so you basically, that's where we're getting our cues from. And Plato's making the point that, well, good culture has to help people develop, give them the right cues, because culture can do the opposite. Culture can go either way. It's not this kind of absolute Puritan, you know, morality play, or it's not just some, you know, it's not a Dionysian kind of cathartic thing where you're just supposed to have an experience, and you have that experience, you know, you go to an EDM rave, was super awesome, then it's over. You know, you have this high, and then you have this low. Now, you know, go back to your factory job, asshole. Like, that's not the feeling you want either. We want something that leaves us, we want art and culture that leaves us with something more lasting that we can take with us, that we can chew on, that we want to revisit, like a good song, like a good movie, right? There's a good movie, you don't just watch it once. It's fun to rewatch these things, right? A good poem, you don't just read it once. A good song, you don't just listen to it once. But if all that stuff gets distorted, and you know, Lady Gaga is singing about rolling babies' heads down pyramids, or you know, whatever they're singing about these days. She's not actually singing about that, but it may as well
Pretty
in
close,
some
yeah. I
respects.
know.
It's like, well, then you have a problem, because what's made to be fun, what's made to be kind of ecstatic and cool, is like, you know, a marriage with Satan. It's like the I was listening to The Weeknd. He has a song called Sacrifice, and it's all about not wanting to sacrifice the night for your love. Like, that's one of the lyrics, and it's super ambiguous, but the music video is literally the guy kind of strapped to a thing, and it's like a ritual sacrifice, and it's all these guys in black robes, or all these cloaked figures kind of dancing, and it's disco, but it's a sacrifice. And there's tons of these things. So, but you could go back to the Doors. Riders of the Storm sounds like some young girl being kidnapped and sacrificed. So it's always there. And I think what's important, we're not here to, again, bang people on the head, but awareness, right? Like, well, why don't we actually think about what these things are about? You know, let's explore that.
Yeah. Jim
And what,
Morrison's lyrics are incredible. Like, if you read some of this, he's talking about blood drinking. If you read Peace Frog, because he's in your documentary, but I think the lyric is blood stains the roots in the palm trees of Venice, bloody my love in a terrible sunny, bloody red sky of fantastic alley. Blood stains the tip of the finger, bloody in the room of a nation. Blood is the rose of mysterious union. Yeah, that's what it is. That's the line. Yeah,
ooh,
so blood is the rose of mysterious union, and that's about blood drinking, man. Like, his girlfriend was a freaking witch, Cornelia or whatever her name was. So, and I mean, I've done shows on that guy. He was very acquainted with, like, kind of original magic kind of text, pre-Crowley stuff. So,
right. Yeah, so and this stuff is everywhere. So again, are we saying, because I got some blowback, as I guess we'd expect, right, from the documentary, from people who obviously, you know, had a good time back in the good old days, and like that was kind of the soundtrack to their lives, right? A lot of the music. And I told somebody, I said, you know, nobody's telling you you can't enjoy the Doors music in the same way that nobody's telling you you can't have a cookie or you can't enjoy a Big Mac. But we just shouldn't lie to ourselves, right? Like, the truth should still be something sacred that we all aspire to. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying a bit of pop music, but it can't it can't it can't be allowed to shape the entire culture without anything else, right? Without an alternative, without people having access to any kind of higher form of culture that allows them to develop this awareness and not just have the kind of Dionysian cathartic experience and then it's over. And again, it's like go back to your cubicle,
Right.
and that's not nice either, right? So
Do you know what's really weird is it's almost like the pop culture or the modern kind of culture becomes the almost mystical religion to some of these people, to some of these kind of like cubicle dwellers or something. Like they're so up on current events and celebrities and the latest kind of music and maybe fashion and kind of topical culture. It's like it's almost like a religion. It's almost like there's a temple to like plastic pop culture that these people worship at. It's really strange. It's like it supplants that kind of philosophical maybe, or ancient Greek kind of lens of understanding the world. It's really have you ran into those people? I don't know. I have.
well, no, well, that's, yeah, there's this cultish aspect to pop culture that, because sometimes people will hear me and they'll be like, the discourse sounds a bit whatever, extremist or Puritan, or you keep talking about classical culture, et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of the opposite. I'm saying that, well, no, people who like classical culture, people who, if you listen to Mozart, it doesn't mean you're part of some kind of like weird Mozart cult where you have this parasocial relationship with the musician and you're kind of just playing out your life through theirs. And that's what Tim Dillon was talking about in one of the recent shows. He talked about the Taylor Swift fans, and he just made the point that it's like, yeah, there was like some chick on CNN that was freaking out because Taylor Swift announced her engagement to that like Pfizer shill. I don't know his
Right.
name. I don't really care, but
Football
and
player.
yeah, he was just saying it's like her engagement is their engagement, her success is their success, right?
Right.
Her misfortunes are their misfortunes, and a lot of that, though, if you zoom in, it's like it's because they don't really have anything in their life that's really meaningful, that's really substantial, that they're excited about. And so people increasingly live their lives through the lives of others. And obviously, this is kind of, there's a pretty vicious feedback loop because, we got TikTok, we got YouTube, we got all this media where you can just watch that ad infinitum, and like people have the wildest lives that you could only dream of, and it's a bit fascinating sometimes, but it's like, so people live vicariously through the culture, and that's very different than what we're talking about in terms of the effect of listening to a great classical symphony, listening to Mozart's Requiem, or seeing Aeschylus performed on the stage or something like that. The experience is very different, even though they seem very similar. And I think that's what's important. Like, they seem very similar, they're very different, and the way to measure that is you can see the effects are different, right? The way people respond, how they think and feel watching a classical tragedy versus watching Taylor Swift do one of her spells at like a concert with like 80,000 people, and
Right.
then everybody says there's like news stories like nobody really remembered what happened at the concert.
Yeah, like hypnotism. No, I've done a show on that. It's called the Taylor Swift effect. Effect. Her husband's Travis Kelsey.
Right. Shout
But
out.
yeah, but it is interesting, and one of the kind of interesting things I've studied and kind of element of hypnosis is this kind of blurring of personality between one character and another. Just like you said, it's not healthy to be that much. And some of these guys, like, they identify with other darker figures, but like allowing yourself to be hybridized with some of these celebrities is just I mean, the people allow them to do that stuff. Like you said, they have to be emptied or something before this happens. So this celebrity process is very curious and very dangerous. Like that's a dangerous part of any culture. Like at least if you're at a theater, or you go into a theater, you walk out, you're like, okay, I walked through a portal and I left that portal, and that portal signifies that that's behind me and in my brain. But in some of these celebrity cultures, it's not. There's no portal.
Yeah, and as not to overkill, but Tim Dillon also made the point that, well, the other thing is that it's mediocrity. So it'd be another thing if, it was absolute excellence that was coming from, Taylor Swift's Love Story or whatever, all these songs and these albums, but these are not the verses of Aeschylus either. So if people, these aren't the Psalms, if people can't discern the qualitative difference between some kind of like romantic fairy tale Taylor Swift song and like the choruses of Aeschylus or Job or something, that's a problem too, right?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. It's a strange thing in this culture, and I think it goes into the devil at Woodstock is this kind of supplanting of this kind of Dionysian kind of superficial culture. And that's kind of what ties into McGowan and Weird Scenes, is that this 60s took place with the creation of this music and bands that reflected these values, right? It wasn't like they're talking about tragedy or anti-warism or maybe other things. Maybe there's a few songs here and there like Five Dead in Ohio or something like that. But most of it's just kind of like have fun, party, and it's beautiful outside and be beautiful forever or something like that.
Strawberry fields forever, break on through the other side. And hey, and we all, I have sort of, I don't want to say sentimental, but there's a nostalgia there, right? I think that's the other thing to address. And that's why, as I've told people, like nobody's telling you can't enjoy, the Doors or the Beatles. That's really not the point. But, it's important to know history, right? It's important to know how we got here and that, how culture is created. A lot of the documentary, one of the punchlines, as we get to the Dave McGowan stuff, is that nobody would have trouble sort of imagining that Katy Perry or Britney Spears, lots of catchy songs, I'm not, let them play. That's fine. If you're in the car, you're stuck in traffic, it's not that bad, right? It can be pretty fun. But that they're kind of like, nobody would have trouble admitting that these kind of sound like they or came from music industry test tubes of some sort.
Right.
But if you suggest the same thing for the Doors or, whatever from the 1960s, the Byrds, right, who Dave McGowan talks a lot about, or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Or the Beatles, like who wrote all the Beatles songs? Like I've done shows where there's no way they could have written the album Revolver. They didn't write it. There's no question. They didn't have time. They were touring.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't even know that. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's the guy is Sage of Quay, but I think he proved that there was no amount of time that they could have had to write the songs. So that means they showed up in the studio to play the songs to get it with the production times. Like it was making records back then was totally different, and you needed time to stamp out the vinyl and all this stuff. And it's like
right.
they either
Right.
showed up with all those things while they were on tour writing them, but there's no evidence, or somebody else made those songs and they sat down and wrote them, which they weren't they were good playing musicians, but none of those guys had an accomplished musical background. They just didn't have it at a very young age. They're super young. They're in their early 20s.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's like, again, there were talented people. Like I like to insist there are talented people involved in all that. It might not be the people we think they are, right? And they're the culture machine may be a bit more elusive than what we're presented, right? The appearance of things at the surface, and it's just so it's important to keep that in mind. And as we're consuming things, it's just like it's at a certain, it's kind of just like food, right? Like nobody's saying don't have a Chips Ahoy or something, but like, you know, if you're gonna go hog wild and you don't even know what goes into making any of these things, like that's not good either. So
Right.
yeah,
But those people you mentioned, Gaga and Britney Spears, these are fronts. Like people are writing their music, and there's people behind the scenes of all these guys. Michael Jackson had that guy Quincy Jones, total genius, who also said that um, uh, the drummer for the Beatles couldn't play, and he would literally tell them to go to lunch and bring in bit players who could play drums to play his things for the shows. Like this is evidence. Like he's just saying this
right.
guy did not play on these records. And the same thing, I think George Martin was kind of the producer behind some of the Beatles stuff. He's literally stamped on some of these albums as like the producer, and the names of the Beatles aren't on there. And the guy was a total genius. Like he was classically trained musician.
Right. Well, you know what? And that's an interesting point that you make, though, because you'll find that even for a lot of the most popular and the biggest pop songs, the actual producers and composers, yes, some of these people are, it's wild. They're brilliant.
Yeah.
Max Martin is one of the biggest pop songwriters ever, you know, from Britney Spears' Hit Me Baby One More Time to like all the early Backstreet Boys stuff to The Weeknd to it's crazy. Like when you look at all the songs that this guy's written and that like how these melodies and all these different choruses and things came into his head, you're like, wow, this is crazy. Who is this guy? And then what's weird is that it's hard to find anything about them. Like these people are very mysterious, and it just goes to show, you know, there's a lot of magic in modern culture creation, and in that sense, you know, it's culture has this power, uh, whether it's ancient Greece or it's modern pop culture. Songs, Plato called songs charms, the seductive charms of the muses, that they can seduce you, they can lure you, they can inspire you, they have all this power. And when we kind of think about that, you know, it's useful. It actually can lead to insights, and at the same time, we don't have to. Yeah, we don't have to consume things blindly.
Right.
And but yeah, it's fascinating.
The critical analysis, this guy Martin wrote, I mean, we're talking about Swift. He wrote Shake It Off and Bad Blood. So this guy is Taylor Swift. Holy smokes. I mean, that's the funny thing. He probably makes the lion's share of the money too, because he gets royalty credit and all that stuff. But I think people, you're right. You have to have a critical analysis. You've got to have kind of a Dave McGowan look at all this stuff, culture creation, social engineering. I mean, yeah, it's really incredible. We're at the 45-minute mark. Is there anything you'd like to add? I kind of got to run out of here. I know you got on a time frame as
Right.
well. Where
Well,
can
yeah,
people
I
find
mean,
your stuff and summarize everything?
yeah, we could go on for a while. I would just invite
Yeah.
everybody to come check out the documentary. It's a hoot. Like we've really only scratched the surface. And the idea, based on everything we've just discussed, is to create a transformative experience, like something genuinely fun that takes us on a journey of discovery. And it goes everywhere from Huxley to Plato, from the Doors to Laurel Canyon. So if people go to ageofmuses.substack.com, they'll see the documentaries featured on the homepage. And yeah, you'll find our YouTube channel. Otherwise, for people who really like these subjects, there's my book, which is also featured on the website, A Renaissance or New Middle Ages, Magic, Mystery, and the Transformation of the West. Transformation is written TRNANCE dash formation, right? So it's all about the role of trans in shaping culture, minds, civilizations.
Yeah, it really is. And that's kind of one of the interesting thing about it. Sargent, you mentioned the documentary is like literally going to, prehistoric or primitive peoples and watching how important trance is in this kind of self trance creation and what we do to ourselves. In some ways, this music and Taylor Swift kind of puts you into trance, just like we talked about, or some of these other artists. Some of them are pretty open about it. Like that one concert that was in Texas with the African American guy. I can't remember. Was it Afro World or Astro World or something like that, like literally going through a circular tunnel, like a hypnosis tunnel. Like, I mean, some of these guys, you got to be careful about your culture. Like, you're careful about your food or what you put in your body. Careful what you put in your brain. And check this out. Check out the documentary. Check out Age of Muses and the book as well. And again, the author is David B. Gosselin, Gosselin. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, William. It was fun.
Yeah. Till next time. Stay there.